Stabilization is quieter than people expect, but it's powerful. And it's not about shrinking your life. It's about strengthening your capacity to live in it. I know optimization is exciting, but stabilization is so important. And in the body, stabilization looks like more predictable energy, fewer crashes, less of that wired and tired. Sleep becomes steadier. And you may still have hormonal shifts, especially during perimenopause, but they don't feel as destabilizing because the nervous system isn't amplifying every fluctuation.
Welcome back to Medicine with Meaning with Dr. Julie Ta. We've talked about stress, hormones, food, blood sugar, boundaries, and nervous system regulation. But today, we're zooming out because chronic symptoms are rarely caused by one thing. They reflect how supported or unsupported your whole system is. Dr. Julie, today we're talking about designing your health ecosystem. When you say health ecosystem, what do you mean? How is that different from just fixing symptoms one at a time?
That is such an important question. So when I say health ecosystem, I'm talking about understanding that your nervous system, your biology, your daily rhythms, your relationships, and even your sense of meaning are constantly interacting. So we're trained to think in parts, fix the hormones, heal the gut, address anxiety. But the reality is that the body does not operate in parts. It operates as a responsive system. So take perimenopause, for example. A woman might come in saying, my hormones are all over the place, and she's experiencing mood shifts, sleep disruption, anxiety like she's never had before. And yes, hormones are fluctuating. That's real. But what I often see is that the nervous system has been under strain for years. It's that high responsibility, constant output, with very little recovery. And so the hormonal shifts of perimenopause don't happen in isolation. They land inside an already stressed ecosystem. And it's the nervous system that is constantly interpreting life, how safe or pressured it feels, whether you're supported or overextended. And that interpretation shapes physiology. And this isn't about mindset. It's about how perception influences stress signaling in the body. A symptom by symptom approach asks, how do we fix the hormones? Whereas an ecosystem approach asks, what is the system responding to? And how do we strengthen it so that we can navigate this hormonal transition? When we support the whole ecosystem, that is, restoring rhythm, safety, and alignment, hormonal shifts often become more manageable because the system underneath it is steadier.
I feel like we've gotten used to see the body in different parts, but we often forget that everything acts together. And you often say, before we optimize, we stabilize. What does stabilization actually look like in the body?
Well, stabilization is quieter than people expect, but it's powerful. And it's not about shrinking your life. It's about strengthening your capacity to live in it. I know optimization is exciting, but stabilization is so important. And in the body, stabilization looks like more predictable energy, fewer crashes, less of that wired and tired. Sleep becomes steadier. And you may still have hormonal shifts, especially during perimenopause, but they don't feel as destabilizing because the nervous system isn't amplifying every fluctuation. Physiologically, it means the stress response isn't constantly activated. So the body isn't subtly bracing all day long. And so cortisol rhythms smooth out, inflammation decreases, digestion improves, and recovery actually happens. And this is what we would call biological resilience. But it's also emotional resilience. You're less reactive, more steady. And over time, it becomes personal resilience. You trust your body more. You stop overriding yourself. And if we try to optimize, push metabolism, push detox, push performance on top of an unstable system, we often just layer more strain. So stabilization builds the foundation so the system can adapt, recover, and grow stronger over time.
You just made me question whether we actually need optimization. If we are stable, it feels like that's what the body needs to thrive. And if you're in that state, you probably are able to create and move better through life. So why do so many people chase isolated fixes, supplements, diet, protocols instead of strengthening the whole system?
Well, I think it makes sense. We've been trained to think in parts. If something feels off, we look for, the one variable to correct, that, hormone to balance, the nutrient to replace, the gut to fix. And sometimes that approach is helpful, especially for acute issues. But chronic symptoms are usually more layered. They reflect accumulated strain over time. That is stress physiology, hormonal transitions, disrupted rhythms, that high responsibility and not enough recovery. And I think it's also because it feels reassuring to focus on one intervention, feels simpler. It gives us something concrete to do. And certainly culturally, it's easier to market a supplement than to build resilience. And again, optimization is exciting, it's sexy, but strengthening the system is quieter. If the ecosystem underneath isn't supported, those improvements often don't hold. And it's because the body is still operating under strain. And I see so many capable women trying harder and harder to optimize when what their systems actually need is steadier support.
In today's world, optimization can even be a source of stress for the body. I think that if your body is stable, then it'll just optimize. Like it's the next step. Naturally, it will optimize itself without you having to focus on that. And you've developed something called the well-being ecosystem. What inspired you to create a structured framework around this idea?
Well, it really emerged from patterns I was seeing repeatedly in my medical practice. Women would come in with fatigue, anxiety, perimenopausal shifts, gut symptoms, and many of them have tried multiple targeted protocols, and sometimes those interventions helped, but often it was temporary. And, there's a lot of frustration that the improvements didn't always sustain. So what I began noticing was that when we focus first on regulating the nervous system and restoring circadian rhythm, and if we layered intervention thoughtfully, the body responded differently. So cortisol rhythms stabilized, inflammatory markers improved, and hormonal fluctuations felt less destabilizing because, again, that stress response wasn't amplifying them. And I realized that, it wasn't just about treating conditions. I was truly helping women to strengthen their ecosystem. And so creating a structured framework allows me to teach that more clearly so that women can understand that their symptoms weren't random or personal failures, but that it's a reflection of how their system had been adapting to load over time. And I wanted something that felt scientifically grounded and deeply human, something that respected physiology and the lived experience of women navigating complex seasons of life. And if I'm going to be truly honest, I wish that somebody had shared such a structured system with me when I was struggling with some of my complex seasons of life. And so it's not only informed by my medical practice as a physician caring for women, but also my own experience.
That's beautiful, Dr. Julie. And at its core, this model recognizes that the nervous system, biology, daily rhythms, relationships, and meaning all interact. Why is the nervous system the foundation of the ecosystem?
Well, I think that's been a common theme in prior episodes and certainly in this model. So the nervous system is foundational because it's constantly regulating how the body responds to the outer world. So our nervous system is the interface between what you experience and how your body responds. And it interprets life and translates it into physiology. So it's not just about stress in a psychological sense. It's about physiology. The autonomic nervous system influences things like heart rate variability, digestion, immune signaling, inflammation, blood sugar regulation, and hormonal communication. So if the nervous system is chronically activated, even subtly, the body shifts into that protective state. And this is where cortisol, becomes irregular, inflammation signaling increases, sleep becomes disrupted, and again, hormonal fluctuations feel more destabilizing. So it doesn't mean everything is stress, but it means that the nervous system sets the tone for how the rest of the systems function. That, it is upstream to all of these other biological systems. And when regulation improves, when the system senses more safety and rhythm, the body has more capacity to recalibrate. Then hormones communicate more smoothly, digestion improves, and recovery happens more efficiently. So we start with nervous system, not because it's trendy, but again, because it's upstream. It influences how every other intervention lands.
That's so interesting how you mentioned that it's like that translator between what happens outside and how your body reacts or responds to your life circumstances. We're constantly living in our bodies that are responding to the outside world. So it does make a lot of sense that it is something you have to pay attention to first and foremost, your nervous system. And if you listen carefully to what it is trying to tell you, it's kind of like if you have a certain hygiene for your physical body, have a hygiene for your nervous system, then your body has more capability to feel better or operate better. Is that right?
I love that, the way you put it. We know about sleep hygiene and dental hygiene, and, those have been habits that, people have paid attention to, but nobody talks about nervous system hygiene. Maybe we'll start talking about it here. And that the word hygiene means it's something we need to tend to. and work on. It's, I think, twofold: being aware of the state of our nervous system, right? That awareness first, and then doing something to shift our nervous system to that parasympathetic nervous system that we've talked about all along. It's, the nervous system where there's rest and digest, where there's recovery and healing. So thank you for creating that term, nervous system hygiene. I love it.
Hygiene, I almost feel like it's something that needs to be cleaned because it's exposed to overload in some form or way. So if the nervous system is the way we face the world, and in this world that is so fast paced, that requires so much of us, then the nervous system is overloaded. Like you said, it's not that everything is stress, but it's just life. You're constantly interpreting something. If the nervous system is overloaded, then it only makes sense that you'd have to put a little bit of attention every day into decompressing that nervous system somehow so that it stabilizes it.
Yeah. I think what's beautiful about our nervous system is, it is certainly sensing the outside environment, right? That's what our nervous system does. It really is there to protect us. But it is not just, only the external environment. It's an interplay between that external environment and how we perceive those stressors. And then we can control our nervous system. I know the word autonomic nervous system implies that it's like automatic. We can't control it, but that's not true. And there are so many exercises and modalities that train our nervous system and take us out of that fight or flight and, calms, balances, sets a healthier tone of the nervous system. And, it really needs to be like part of our daily hygiene habits.
And you mentioned something important. I think it's not just that our nervous system is responding to the external world, but how we perceive things, right? It's linked to, if it's linked to our perception, then we can do some work on our perception for ourselves to feel safer and more at ease. Because you can interpret a situation in a certain way that it causes stress or discomfort, or you can interpret the same situation in a way that doesn't bother you. And that creates different experiences within your body as well.
For sure. That brings up how our thoughts, our beliefs impact our physiology vis-a-vis the nervous system. And if that is upstream to all the biological systems, you can see what an impact our perceptions have on our biology.
So if you can't control your nervous system, but you can become aware of how you interpret things, then that might be a way to regulate and not control, but direct in some way. And Dr. Julie, can you walk us through the pillars of the well-being ecosystem?
Sure. I'd love to. Well, I think, we talked a lot about how the nervous system is the foundation. And I think we've driven that point home, how everything really begins with nervous system regulation. Next would be our biology. I think everybody gets that, right? Our hormones, our gut, our digestive system, our immune system. So, certainly biology is important, but it's very important to understand that supporting hormones, metabolism, gut health, all of, those interventions integrate more smoothly when the whole system isn't in defense mode. And so, it goes back to bringing stabilization to our nervous system. And then the next pillar would be daily rhythms and our environment. So our bodies are built on patterns. Certainly, the light and dark cycles, also known as circadian rhythm. Work rest is another cycle that's important to keep in mind. And when these rhythms are chaotic, our biology can become chaotic. And when they're consistent, the system can stabilize. Next pillar's relationships. Certainly emotional safety is not just a psychological idea. It can change nervous system tone. And so if you have chronic overextension or lack of boundaries, it can keep the body in that, sympathetic, nervous system, that fight or flight. So clear limits and supportive connection allow recovery. And the final pillar is meaning and alignment. So when someone is living in a way that feels deeply misaligned with what matters most to them, that creates ongoing internal tension. And over time, that tension becomes physiological strain. So all 5 of these pillars are interacting constantly. And we're not fixing just the parts. We're strengthening the whole ecosystem so the body can function more coherently.
This is such important information, and I think it's so relevant for today's world. When we have our ecosystem in harmony, then there's true well-being. And Dr. Julie, when someone is focusing on hormones, metabolism, or gut health, what determines whether those interventions actually hold long-term?
So what determines whether a treatment holds long-term is the system's capacity to integrate it. So we can absolutely influence individual pathways. So for instance, adjust thyroid hormone, optimize hormone replacement therapy, treat dysbiosis. But whether those improvements stabilize depends on the regulatory terrain underneath. So, if cortisol rhythms are erratic, or sleep is fragmented, or the stress response is chronically activated, the body is still operating in adaptation mode. And in that state, even the most well-designed intervention can often be temporary or, not be sustainable. But when the system is more regulated, again, going back to, when that nervous system tone is steadier and recovery capacity is stronger, biology integrates differently and hormone signaling becomes more predictable. Certainly inflammation is less reactive. Our metabolism stabilizes. So it's not just about choosing the right treatment. It's about whether the body has the capacity to receive it.
How do the structure and patterns of our daily lives quietly shape our biology over time?
So important. The structure of our days is constantly signaling to the body and to the nervous system. If you think about our physiology, it is, rhythmic. For instance, cortisol rises with morning light and then, it steadily decreases, and at night it's low so we can fall asleep. Melatonin is also very important for sleep, and that rises with darkness. So if we're, working late on our screens, it can inhibit the rise of melatonin. Certainly insulin sensitivity shifts across the day. And then you can recognize that when our sleep timing varies widely, or when, light exposure is artificial late at night, or you have, long stretches of work without recovery, our rhythms can become misaligned with our biology. And this misalignment quietly can alter our hormone signaling, appetite regulation, mood stability, and inflammation. So the body thrives on predictable patterns, consistent wake times, morning light exposure, certainly, having, good cycle, boundaries around work and rest, and that these aren't just lifestyle tips. They're biological signals that reinforce stability. And over time, repeated daily patterns shape the ecosystem more powerfully than any single intervention. And I don't think people recognize that, these small shifts in our daily rhythms can be a very powerful intervention.
It's so important that you mentioned this. I think that, of course, we create our rhythms, but we often forget that there's actually biological rhythm, natural rhythms, nights for sleep. When the sun rises, our internal energy rises as well, if that's one way to say it. But we often don't respect that. We've changed those patterns for ourselves and wonder why we might not be feeling the best.
For sure. And I was just thinking about in our post-pandemic world, many of us have shifted to working from home or, have some sort of hybrid model. And I've certainly noticed in myself that, the work rest boundaries are, very fluid, and that I'm, working, well into the evening and at night. And you have to create more boundaries and structure for yourself. I certainly have felt the impact of that, and it's something that I need to honor again. Rhythms, are really important for supporting that whole ecosystem.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, boundaries. So relationships and boundaries are a part of the ecosystem too. Why is emotional safety biologically protective?
Yeah, so just as daily rhythms send signals to the body, so do our relationships. The nervous system, again, it's constantly interpreting whether we are safe or under threat. And that's not just physically, but, in our relationships. And when someone feels chronically overextended, or unsupported, or unable to set limits, the body registers that as stress. And that can activate sympathetic nervous system, which increases cortisol, elevates the inflammatory pathways, disrupts sleep, causes gut dysfunction. And over time, that relational strain can become biological strain. On the other hand, when there's emotional safety, clear boundaries, supportive connection, and a sense that you're not constantly overriding yourself, the nervous system shifts towards regulation. And in that state, that parasympathetic nervous system, digestion improves, hormone signaling steadies, and we're able to activate the repair mechanisms in our body. And know that boundaries aren't selfish. They're so important for regulating our nervous system and hence our ecosystem for health.
And I think we've talked about it in a different episode, but it goes back to our human memory of feeling safe in our environment. It's like survival instinct, right? If we don't feel safe in it, then we're always in alert, in defense, and feeling threat. And that's not a sustainable place to be, because all our energy is used in that alertness and in that trying to protect ourselves. Then our bodies feel depleted to complete other functions. So I think we don't take into consideration the importance of having healthy relationships.
Yeah, but I think we all feel it in our body, all of us can relate to when something is not right with a relationship that is important. feel it physically,
Yeah.
where there's a tightness in your throat or tightness in your chest or just a heaviness in your body. That's a reflection of our nervous system sensing that danger and then expressing it in our physical body.
And I think it's true for the opposite. When you feel safe or happy with a relationship, you feel trust, relaxed and at ease and nothing worries you, whether it's like your son or daughter or anyone that you feel safe with, right? Your body also feels that.
Yeah, well, love is a beautiful, well, I was going to say state, but, there is this hormone known as oxytocin. I think we have talked about it before, but that's sort of considered the love hormone. And that does calm our nervous system. And, when we feel love, it does calm our body, our nervous system. So yeah, focus on love.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned this. We might have to talk about it in a different episode, but we've often heard that love is healing, but people think that it's just like a philosophical expression. But from what you mentioned just right now, there's also biology involved in feeling good emotions or being in certain states.
For sure. Our hormones certainly impact our emotions and our emotions impact our hormones. So it is very cyclical and we are in more control than we realize where we can control our physiology. But I do recognize that it is sometimes easier to say than to actually do and practice.
And Dr. Julie, that leads me to my next question. Meaning and alignment. How does living out of alignment create physiological strain?
So meaning and alignment are often overlooked in medicine, but they're a part of the ecosystem too. And when I talk about alignment, I'm not talking about perfection. I'm talking about coherence. The degree to which how you're living matches what matters most to you and what your system can sustainably carry. So when someone consistently lives out of coherence, so saying yes when they mean no, prioritizing everyone else while suppressing their own needs, staying in this pattern that feels misaligned, the nervous system interprets that as ongoing strain. And that strain isn't just emotional. It shows up physiologically. And as we talked about, throughout this episode, when our physiology is in that heightened state, that fight or flight nervous system, it impacts everything else downstream. So the body is constantly interpreting whether life feels manageable and meaningful. And if it's chronically misaligned, that can show up in our physiology, in our nervous system. So living in greater coherence doesn't eliminate stress, but it reduces that unnecessary internal conflict. And when that internal conflict decreases, the system is able to stabilize. And that alignment is less about chasing happiness and more about reducing physiological friction.
And it makes so much sense as you were describing this. I was thinking of why is it sometimes so hard for us to understand that this is really important, or why do we overlook it? But if we were to think about getting in a car and let's say the computer of the car wants to do one thing and then the wheels are going in another direction and they're not working in alignment with the steering wheel, and then how would you go anywhere?
I know what you're talking about when the steering wheel is not aligned with the axle, I think. You're not going to be able to steer in the direction that you want to go, is what you're saying. So, yeah, you have to, have that alignment. And I think, it's important to pause, have some quiet space so that you can sense if you are in alignment and have that coherence. And sometimes we don't want to see because, what we'll find out may require some shifts that need to be made in your life. So there are many reasons why people may not, try to get into alignment. That's another whole episode on its
Yeah,
own.
absolutely. And might be good to talk about it because perhaps people don't really talk about this aspect of health. Like you mentioned, it implicates so much more. But anyway, you describe transformation not as dramatic, but stabilizing, moving from strain to steadiness. Why is that shift so powerful?
Yeah, we're often taught to think of transformation as, something dramatic, like a breakthrough, a reset, or like, before and after. But the body doesn't actually heal that way. It stabilizes. And that's really important, that we allow for that stabilization, certainly first in our nervous system. And moving from strain to steadiness means that the nervous system isn't constantly bracing. Then energy becomes more predictable. Those hormonal shifts feel less chaotic and you recover more easily from stress instead of spiraling from it. So this shift is powerful because it increases capacity and you're living with more adaptability. This steadiness might not look dramatic from the outside, but biologically, it represents a system that has moved from protection toward resilience.
This is interesting. So much to reflect on. So if we are going in the direction of being stable, why are we craving such an impactful change when it's just landing in something that is softer and more harmonious for our health and well-being? And when someone tells you, I feel like myself again, or when someone says, I feel like myself again, what does that actually reflect biologically and emotionally?
When someone says, I feel like myself again, it's rarely about perfection. Okay. It usually reflects regulation. Their sleep is steadier, their mood is less reactive, their energy feels more predictable, and they're not constantly pushing through exhaustion. Biologically, it often means cortisol rhythms have stabilized, hormone communication feels smoother, inflammation has decreased. Emotionally, it reflects self-trust. I love this one. Something that I'm currently working on. That's, not constantly overriding yourself. And this helps to feel more of that coherence we just talked about. And certainly, feeling more like yourself is that return of internal familiarity. It's when your body feels like it's an ally again instead of something you're fighting against. And, certainly, you have less symptoms. It just, it's probably that well-being that I love talking about. I think that's what, most women say when they feel like themselves again.
I felt it myself, like, oh, I feel like myself again. It's not dramatic. It's like one day you just notice that you're feeling great. And really, and that's feeling like that's what we associate to feeling more like ourselves.
Yeah, I know it might be just as simple as feeling good in our body, in our mind. And I think, so many of us are used to not feeling good and just dealing with symptoms. And, they're not worrisome symptoms or they're not, disease, but it might be feeling meh or, not feeling good. But we just get used to it. We push through. And so it is really important for everyone to hear that you can feel good, and that should be the norm.
Yeah, there doesn't need to be a constant internal battle, or our bodies don't need to be overworked all the time, like trying so hard to just get through the day, right? And if someone listening wants to begin deciding their own health ecosystem, where should they start this week?
I recommend starting with regulation and rhythm. So, instead of asking, what supplement do I need? I would ask, what signal of stability can I send my body this week? So that might be consistent wake times, or morning light exposure, or definitely, have a defined end to your workday, which is probably, one that I need to work on. So it might just be one small boundary that reduces overextension. So the goal isn't, a major overhaul. It's really about sending repeated signals of safety and predictability. And this small, consistent shift reshapes the terrain over time.
And Dr. Julie, what's one small way they can assess whether their system feels strained or supported?
Yeah, so one simple question I often suggest is, does my body feel like it's bracing? So notice your breath, your shoulders, your jaw, your sleep patterns, your energy across the day. Strain often feels like subtle urgency, even when nothing acute is happening. Support feels like steadiness. So you don't have to analyze everything. Just begin noticing where your system feels pressured. Pay attention to just how you're feeling in your body. And again, it goes back to that pause we were talking about. So if your system feels strained, that's when you can introduce, that one small signal of stability this week. And remember that your nervous system, your biology, your rhythms, your relationships, your sense of meaning, they are all interacting every day, whether you're aware of it or not. And when you strengthen that ecosystem intentionally, resilience grows quietly. And over time, that quiet steadiness becomes something quite powerful. And then you start to feel like yourself again. And not because it's forced, but because your whole system is supported. And know that you don't have to overhaul your life overnight. And this does not need to be a dramatic reset.
Thank you, Dr. Julie. You've left me with so much to reflect on. And we've reached the end of our episode. I'm excited for the episodes to come, and I'm definitely super excited for the well-being ecosystem. Is there anything else you'd like to leave the audience with before we close?
Just that over the years in practice, I realized that patients didn't need more information. They needed structure and support to stabilize their whole system. And that's why I created the well-being ecosystem. And I look forward to sharing more about it in the future. And I'm excited to help others feel more like themselves again. And certainly, if today's episode sparked questions about your own ecosystem, your stress or energy or your rhythms, you're always welcome to reach out. And you can visit me at www.julietawmd.com or send me a DM on Instagram at julie.taw.md. All questions are welcome, and thank you for listening.
And join us next time as we continue exploring medicine with meaning.